ESG is big on pretty much everyone's mind, especially when it comes to vendors, when it comes to the supply chain. Everyone I talk to mentions to me sustainability, ESG, and I love it. It's about time we started talking about these things just as much as talking about cost reduction and risk management, things like that. But what does ESG stand for? So ESG is a subset of sustainability. Think of it as iterations of CSR, so corporate social responsibility. I'm pretty sure I got that acronym right there. Each element of ESG is environmental for the E, for the S, societal, governance for G. And ESG has become a way of measuring the sustainability, the societal impacts of a company on the world. But getting started can feel rather intimidating. Environmental factors measure the impact that one has on the planet, right? On nature, on just about anything. This could be about how the company manages its carbon footprint, whether it uses renewables, what is its approach to dealing with waste. And that could be actual waste. Like, we don't need to use this product anymore. So are we going to recycle it, reuse it, resell it? That's kind of circular economy vibe. Or do we have waste as a byproduct, as a part of our process? Perhaps we've got chemical waste, perhaps we've got human waste. Social factors assess how the organization interacts, deals with elements such as people, so its employees, its customers, its suppliers, its investors, its shareholders, and people that can be impacted both positively and negatively. So this could be elements such as modern slavery, so when people are forced into work in conditions that are not mutual. This could be pay. Do we have equality of pay between male and female workers? What product safety controls do they have in place? Does it contribute in any way positively, negatively to local communities and the place where, well, it does its work? It's a really interesting way of looking at this. And then on governance, we're going to be looking at the executives of the company, the shareholders, the ownership structure, pay, diversity, audit controls, processes, governance within the business, kind of the stuff that people think is boring, but if you get it wrong, it's really hard to do the E element and the S element of ESG. Actually, it's pretty hard to run a business if you get this part wrong. So how do we assess our vendors on ESG, right? Well, first, we need to know what we're going to assess them on. So we need some goals, some targets, some idea of what we need to ask them. And the only way that this is going to work is if you have some company-wide goals or OKRs that detail what you need in a given period of time so that you can then look at, hey, our company really wants to reduce its scope 3 emissions. And we all know that scope 3 emissions largely exist. 50 to 80% of those exist within supply chains. We know that as vendor management or as legal dealing with vendor contracts that we could start figuring out how we only onboard vendors that are carbon neutral or on that journey. And then contractually, how do we hold them to account? So that's kind of where we want to get started here. And you'll need to do this for just about everything. And you'll probably end up going back to that governance element of ESG, building out a policy that states exactly what you are looking for with your vendors. Once you've figured out your policy around this, you'll then build out the actual questions that you'll ask your vendors. And my biggest advice to you here is make sure you understand how are you going to score them. What is a good response from a vendor and what is a bad one? What's one that you're a little bit unsure of, but perhaps with some additional information, you can live with it or you can improve it over the term of the contract with the relationship you're going to build. So I kind of see it as you're building out your company-wide goals that then becomes your vendor ESG policy, which then becomes your day-to-day playbook on how we deal with this. And that playbook is exceptionally important because that is your first interaction with the vendors. And that's why at Gatekeeper, we've been building an ESG best practice workflow out. We know this is incredibly intimidating, can be time consuming. And we built a process that enables you to send out your questions, and we have pre-built questions, but they're super easy to change for whatever you want. you send out your questions to your vendors, they answer them, you can review them and approve them, you can have back and forths with them, make sure that you've got everything as you need it, and you've got a audit trail of that. You've got it living and breathing within the Gatekeeper platform so that you can always address it or come back to it or work with your vendors to improve it. I think it's going to really enable so many people to work in a far better way with their vendors. But there's a word of warning here. We don't stop here. This is an essential part, right? We've defined goals. We've got our policy, we've got our playbook, we've now got a means to do this at scale because we've got it in Gatekeeper, we've got the workflow live and people are responding at all times, we've got teams reviewing this information to make sure it aligns with our playbook, our policy, and our company-wide goals. How do we really know that what our vendors are putting down is true? And there's always a bit of an unsureness around this. So for your most at-risk vendors who could fall foul of ESG. And think about it, if you're sourcing raw materials, if you're in garments, so you have vendors that are making clothing or using any kind of fabrics somewhere in the world, they're probably high risk. Why? Because we know that we have a lot of history and a lot of proof that these supply chains have modern slavery issues. It's just a really easy way to look at it. So part of your strategy around this, you need to identify the high risk vendors that you need to go a step further with. And with these vendors, you will more than likely want to conduct a site audit, an audit of their head offices or a number of their factories or manufacturing hubs or how they interact with their vendors. This is the real complex part, right? How do we get this right? You need to move away from the screen and you really need to go out and seek the evidence for yourself. And you can document all of that in Gatekeeper, whether it's photos, whether it's documentation, videos, whatever it is. You can keep all of that linked to your vendor, to your contracts to make sure that everything is legit as you need it to be. If you like what you saw throughout this video, you saw a bit of Gatekeeper, you thought, hey, we could do with a bit of Gatekeeper in our lives. Well, I've got a link in the description of this video where you can just click on it and book a meeting in with one of my team, with one of our experts here to come and talk about ESG. We can show you a bit about the workflow, understand any pain points that you currently have in your vendor processes when it comes to ESG or anything else. And hopefully you can get started on your ESG journey with a bit of a head start without so much fog around like, how do we get started with this? And I just want to say, really appreciate you taking the time to learn a little bit about ESG, considering how to do it, figuring out how to scale it and where to go from that point. I think that you'll really like this video that I'm showing you on screen right now. It's all about what is vendor onboarding. And I fundamentally think that you could implement your ESG practice within your onboarding practice to really scrutinize your vendors as early as possible.